How's everybody this evening? Good. This is a packed house. Obviously, we're truly delighted to have you here. My name is Mark Strickland. I'm the provost here of the Seminole campus. And on behalf of my president, Dr. Tanja Williams, welcome to the Seminole campus. Obviously, we couldn't do this without the support of many. David Clement and his staff, obviously technology, our caterer that was here this evening, Nature's Table. We want to just give a shout out to them and thank them for their hard work. And while I'm giving shout outs, we've got friends from Petersburg College, Lifelong Learning Institute that are here. We are thankful for your presence here this evening. And we also have a media co-sponsor, which is the Tampa Bay Times and WEDU Television. Let's give them a shout out as well, and thanks. Do we have any students in the house this evening? Any students? Where are our students at? All over here in the corner? We've got a few over here. Yeah, they're here on behalf of our Student Government Association. Thank you. And obviously, I see some familiar faces, some folks that continue to grace us with their presence. I saw Gene Stern. It seems like he's at every single one of these. Where's Gene at? There you go. Hey, Gene. And then how many of you have been to an institute dinner like this before? Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much. Truly thankful for your support. So tonight's program is presented by the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions. The Institute this spring completes its 8th year of providing thoughtful and provocative programs that address head-on the most difficult and contentious issues of the day in a civil setting with the goals of engaging students and citizens in civic action and fostering a productive dialogue in search of solutions to those contentious problems. Now to get our program underway, please welcome to the stage the moderator for this evening's program, Mr. David Clement, who's our Executive Director of the Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions. David?
Thank you, Provost Strickland, and let me add my welcome and thanks to each of you for coming out tonight. I am so pleased at how many of you did. I'm told that we are at capacity tonight of just at 200 people, which is our largest audience, except for one, the naturalist photographer, Clyde Butcher. When the fire marshal let us put more than that in, we had this room more, but you're the largest audience since then in 2014, so thank you. And this is supposed to be a boring topic, right? Economics is the dismal science? I don't think so, judging by your interest in it. And I've asked our speakers, who are not boring, but to put their presentation in layman's terms so that we'll all be able to understand them. And after all, this is not an obscure topic anymore. After all, during the midterm elections last summer and fall, it was in the news a lot as candidates who campaigned openly as socialists actually won election to office, including, as if you notice the slides while you're reading, several who were elected to Congress. And so as I read up on socialism as a political movement, I was surprised to learn that it had been a strong force in American politics going back to the 1920s. It fell into disfavor when the rise of communism came in the 30s and got a really bad name in the post-World War II years when some of the European countries adopted it as their form of government. But if you remember, some of you who are my generation remember Margaret Thatcher kind of put a stop to that in Britain in the 80s, and she was Ronald Reagan's peer. But times change, and so do attitudes. As our slides showed, if you looked at that one, millennials don't necessarily share our generation's aversion to socialism or our love for capitalism. In fact, 51% of millennials do not support capitalism, while 33% have a favorable view of socialism. So it's no longer a verboten topic. But tonight's speaker isn't here to talk about socialism per se. His topic is democratic socialism. What's that? Well, why don't we let him tell you? Philip Kotler is a professor of international marketing at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. He is an internationally known economist, consultant, and author, having written, your program says 57 books, but I just learned in speaking with him, the actual number is 77 books, including what I'm told is the Bible for business schools, marketing, management analysis, planning, implementation, and control. You have in your program the full biography of him, how he travels throughout Europe, Asia, and South America to advise companies and governments about sound marketing and economic principles and how to develop their skill sets for global competition. We are honored to have him address us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Philip Kotler.
David, thank you very much for that introduction. He was wrong. It's 71 books, not 77. But everyone has to have a hobby. I don't watch football, so I turn it into another book. In any case, I'm so excited about this topic. There's so much happening. How many of you know about the Giving Pledge? Raise your hands if you heard about it. There's about a dozen hands up. We have billionaires in the world, and thanks to Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, who play bridge together, it's really a father-son relationship, they got the idea that billionaires ought to be giving money back to some extent, and they invented the Giving Pledge, which is this, that you're going to publicly state, by the way, you can go look it up on the internet, and look up the 187 billionaires, including Ted Turner and many names you know, and what they are going to do with their money to do good. You're in the pledge as long as you say that half your money will be given to good philanthropic causes before you die or after your death. Ted Turner's gone all the way. He says all of his wealth will go to the public good causes and so on. I have fun just reading the 187 cases of what these very successful people are trying to do. In the meantime, other people are raising a different question. How do they make so much money without overcharging? In fact, the economist Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, said that anyone who is a billionaire has been cheating, because one can't make a billion without being in a business that has no competition. That in many cases, they were lucky enough to either create something new that doesn't have a competitor, or the competition was weak, because competition will keep, you know, wouldn't we go into an industry which is producing so much wealth, and wouldn't that dampen the amount of wealth that would be made by anyone? Competition works, and if it's not working, Stiglitz believes that in fact, he goes to the next stage. He says that the wealth that they have is 70% of it is unearned. He calls it rent, but you'd have to be an economist to understand this subtle concept of what it means that you're really earning rent, not earning, getting rent. The idea there is the image of someone who owns property and is doing nothing to produce anything. And the money's coming in all the time. Now, I don't want to be, I'm going to show you some slides, but there's another thing I want to tell you about. In the news, last week, were two proposals for new taxes. Don't get upset because it won't affect anyone in this room. One is Alexandria Cortez, a Democratic newly elected woman, proposed that people who earn $10 million or more a year be taxed at 70%. But don't confuse it. She is not saying that the tax is the one getting 10 million or more is going to pay 70% of it back as taxes. That's not the way our tax system works. We have a marginal tax. By the way, the marginal tax is the last amount of money you earned is being taxed now at 37%. By the way, it used to be 90% under Eisenhower. It went down to 70% under Reagan, and then down. Do you know we've had redistribution in this country for a long time? It's the redistribution from the poor to the rich. They're always saying, no redistribution, we don't want it, we're rich and you can't do that to us. They've been doing it to you. Now they only pay 30, the most they'll ever pay on the last 100,000 they made is 37%. So this woman is asking for 70% on the last amount earned. That's enough to bother people. How about the other suggestion that just came about from Elizabeth Warren, again, a very active Democratic woman? She wants a wealth tax. We've never had one. A wealth tax requires knowing how much a person's wealth is and then taxing it at maybe 1% a year. Well, here's what she said. Does anyone earn more than $50 million a year here? Not earn, I mean the wealth. Is anyone, raise your hands if your wealth is more than 50 million. Okay, well, she's very modest. She doesn't want to hurt people. She says only for those who have $50 million or more of wealth, net worth, you know, land that you own, stocks that you own. And she wants to pass a 2% tax each year. She wants to compress the concentration of wealth. You know, if you keep charging such a person 2% a year, their wealth would grow slower, if at all. And by the way, if you're a billionaire, it's a 3% tax, not 2%. So no one, look, I'm going to vote for it because it doesn't affect me. And I'm assuming that the government needs more money, more revenue, and the revenue will go for helping kids in pre-kindergarten, or our infrastructure will be better, no potholes. So I'm just sharing with you some recent things. But let's go to my slide show, so to speak, and we're going to have people attacking me afterwards. They're sitting over here saying that I'm wrong. All right, does capitalism work for you? And this is, you can watch any of the 6 screens around the room. True or false? And that's our answer, our question. Does it work for you? I want to take an episode that recently happened. Pfizer is a very good drug company. Actually, pharmaceutical companies are the second most profitable companies in the world, next to defense, and next to mafia, of course. Pfizer, so they have a CEO, his name is Ian Reed, and he is being given now a 61% pay raise. Now, you normally don't ever, you get a 3% pay raise, right? Therefore, he will be taking home $27.9 million. Now, if I were on their board, I would have questioned that. Their board didn't. They will give this reason. He's such an important man. He's made so much money for us. And he's 65 years old, and he's going to retire now unless we can keep him for another year. And we talked to him, and he said he would need a lot more money to stay one more year. So they gave him a 61% increase. Let's take a vote. You're all on the board now. You're on Pfizer's board. Raise your hand if you approve of giving this man $27.9 million this year. Raise your hand. Good, we have one capitalist here. I want you to be a capitalist. I want you to tell me how you feel about things. But how many would say, I would sort of say no? Okay, so that's the story. That's why I use that episode. It's kind of, it isn't very, most of us agreed there. All right, I want to tell you about some executives and what they're thinking, good and bad guys. Larry Fink is a good guy, very rich guy. He runs one of the biggest investment firms in the world. It's called BlackRock. And Larry Fink made a statement that took courage because he's managing the money of rich people. He shouldn't be alienating them, and here's what he said. He said, it is crucial that business also made a positive contribution to society, that companies need to do more than just make profits. And he said, this lack of preparedness for retirement, and many of you are retired, I got to tell you a story. In the future, people will live on the average to be 100 years old. They will work from the age 20 to 60, 20 to 60. That's 40 years of working. They'll have a lot of time on their hands from 60 to 100. Being retired for 40 years. Do you have the savings to support you for 40 years of retirement? Did you develop enough interests and hobbies to do something with your time? So he's saying this lack of preparedness for retirement is fueling enormous anxiety and fear, undermining productivity in the workplace, and amplifying populism in the political sphere. Populism meaning that very popular, people who say very popular things that are easy to sort of, yes, are taking over. You know, we're actually moving from populists to authoritarians in a lot of countries. A populist will turn into an authoritarian. They'll have a base that supports them, and they will do anything to represent what they told the base they can do. Okay, so let's move on. Some definitions. Everyone knows what free market capitalism is. And I will say more about it in a moment. There is another type of capitalism we call Keynesian capitalism, which says that you could interfere with the free market when it's not performing. So when you have a Great Depression, don't just sit there and wait for austerity to take people down until they're so down that finally it maybe turns around. That's not kind. That's not right. What you do is you print money. Now, printing money is bad if it can cause inflation, but you're printing the money for projects, to build up a bridge, to give work to people. That's what FDR did. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is a Keynesian. But where's the name Keynesian? John Maynard Keynes, the English economist, one of the greatest economists. Don't try to read his book called Money, Capital, and Interest. You'll be lost on the first page. He was Franklin D. Roosevelt's advisor, among others. And they pumped money into the economy and created jobs. Now, Scandinavian capitalism or Nordic capitalism is another thing. It believes that the two most important things are education and health. A society is not a decent one unless it has a good education system and a good health system. Now, do we have a good education system? Look, I can distinguish between the high school level and the college level and so on. Are we producing educated citizens? If you meet one, point them out to me. I mean, both terms, educated and a citizen who votes and cares. And we know the health system is the most expensive of anywhere. And it's a good system. Parts of it are very good. People come for their health here. But we pay too much for pills. There's some kind of conspiracy in the pricing. What is the right price for a pill? You know. You remember the guy who bought a company, the EpiPen? The EpiPen, he bought it, and then he raised the prices 900 times. He was caught. They said you can't do that. He was an embarrassment. But, so you got different kinds of capitalism. Actually, if capitalism is found in every country to some extent, it's a different thing in each country. Japanese capitalism is different than Russian capitalism or Chinese capitalism. Capitalism means that, you know, I'll get into that. Okay, the kind of capitalism we have is called free market capitalism. I'm going to give you a bigger word for it. It's neoliberalism. And the word liberal is a nice word in it, liberalism, but it's neo. It's a new type of liberalism. It believes in some good things. Free trade. I mean, I'd vote for free trade. Deregulation. I think we need a little more deregulation. Privatization, I don't know. We're privatizing the army now with mercenaries. We're privatizing the prisons with private enterprise building. They want to build prisons because it creates money for them. So I'm a little careful about, do we privatize our libraries? Do we privatize our, by the way, education? The charter school movement is actually privatizing the public school system and leaving it with less money to spend on the students. There are some good schools like that, of course, but so then the next thing is economies will grow the fastest by incentivizing businesses to pursue unrestrained economic advantage. So that is the motto of this new free capitalism. Unrestrained, look, read Ayn Rand, read Fountainhead, read Atlas Shrugged. You'll get this idea that anyone who's for goodness is there to use it to make money. Don't trust anyone. Everyone's selfish. You should be selfish. The world would be better off if everyone just pursued their own interests. That's the philosophy of some people. The aim of economic growth is good. We want economic growth. It creates more jobs. But what's missing from the statement? Anything about the distribution of the economic good that has been created. By the way, we use the GDP, gross domestic product, to measure how well our economy has done. And the gross domestic product grows if you smoke cigarettes. If you buy cigarettes, if you break a window, you've increased the gross national, because it has to be replaced. So you can't say everything is good about what sells. And even the hamburgers you're eating and the Coca-Cola aren't that good for you, but it will raise the GDP. The problem that bothers me is GDP is growing, and we want it to grow, but I want to look at the index of happiness, which may be either flat in a country or falling. I want to look at the index of wellness. How much health is there? How much education? GDP can go up, and the others can go down. So we're hoping that more countries will offer two indices. What happened to our GDP, and are we happier because GDP went up or not? So the last thing is that this free market philosophy was from Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, and Milton Friedman, my own instructor at the University of Chicago, and so on. But let's move on. The thesis, in a word, is this, that the free market is not enough. It needs a welfare state, too. It needs what we call a safety plan for people, because some people will lose their jobs or be injured. We have to have something for them. called Social Security, unemployment insurance, food lines, food stamps. So it should be a good society because it's a free market and we have some safety for people who are hurt in that marketplace. A safety net. Okay, there could be other solutions. That's one. This is the one we're living under. So let's ask how well our capitalism is doing. I got this data from the OECD. That is the Organization for Economic Development and it's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. 36 nations, they're the most advanced nations, do all this data collecting. So what do we have? US healthcare expenditures per capita are double what the average of the other 36 countries spend. We can say more, but I'll move on. Infant mortality rates in the US are among the highest in the world. I didn't know that we have very high infant mortality rates. The highest prevalence, this I knew. I can look around. Highest prevalence of obesity. You know, Europeans come here and they're all thin. And they're coming from France where they have this fine, rich food. Okay, US inequality levels are far higher than those. We are more skewed in income distribution between the rich and the poor than other countries in this group. And that we have the highest incarceration rate, the most people in prison. Youth poverty is 25%. And it's only 14% in the average of the other 36 countries. Have I depressed you enough? Anyways, by the way, our poverty is about 14 to 15% of our people, which is about only 43 million people, are under the poverty line. The US voter turnout was 55% people voted in the presidential election. On the average, 75% vote in the OECD countries. By the way, in midterm elections, we only 33% vote. Get people to vote. Now, this one bothers me as an academic. Our students rank 24th in science and reading and 38th in math. So we got to do something there. And then our population ranks number 19 in happiness. There is an index, you can look it up. Just put in index of happiness and you'll see how different countries. Denmark's number 1, by the way. The Scandinavian countries are number 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. What is your income tax bracket? No, don't tell me. But if your annual income is $118,000 or more, and that's a nice number for people to earn, $118,000, you are in the top 10%. Oh, I guess that also says 90% don't earn that in the country. So we're more a country of poor people who don't earn what is a nice middle class number, $118,000 a year. I won't go into the other figures. So I believe there are the workers and the poor are really suffering. Millions of workers live on a very poor amount of income. They can't afford going to college. They can't buy a home. They can't rent a decent apartment. That's a big problem now. We need more affordable housing, and no one wants to build it. We give incentives to developers to build affordable housing, and they can make more money putting up luxury apartments. And many people go hungry if they can't get food stamps or find a soup kitchen. This weather up north has already killed 11 people because it's cold, and they're probably the homeless people who are sitting in their cars and freezing, and so on and so forth. So if you were a worker, here are your 6 fears. I might have a health problem or an emergency. Can you know what it's like to live that way, that You're working and you don't know if you're going to need hip surgery suddenly or have a heart attack. The current job may be destroyed by technology. That's happening. It's coming. Automation. We got to figure out how to support people where there aren't enough jobs anymore. Living costs will rise faster than wages is a fear. If inflation might really make our money increase, our wage increase meaningless. No savings. If I retire, many people retire without any savings. I think the average savings was about $400. I may be wrong on that. I have to check that figure. Not able to help their children or parents. You know, a person who's 40 years old or 50, they're sandwiched between two groups. They got to support their children and send them to college. They got to support their parents who are aging. It's called the sandwich. There's a sandwich squeeze on the 40 to 50-year-old person who needs money to support parents and children. And the fear that the Republican Party may kill Medicare and Social Security without putting in something better. The party says it always has something better. It's been 2 years since they came out with a health plan, right? Where's their health plan? They destroyed one. We got what's left of Obamacare, but what is their health plan? Okay, so I know there are 5 things we could do. We could raise the minimum wage. We could talk about the earned income tax credit. I'll tell you what that is. It's good. It's very good because when you're earning less, you're at the poverty level, there are subsidies to families of money to help them have enough to live on. It's called the Earned Income Tax Credit. Some people are moving toward something called the UBI, the Universal Basic Income. There is one political candidate for the Democratic Party. He's an American Asian, Mr. Wang, whose whole pitch is for the UBI. He wants everyone to get $1,000 a month. That's $12,000 a year, all the time. Rich and poor. I don't understand that one. I don't know why the rich should be getting the UBI. But in any case, you're going to hear more about, I think every child born should have a deposit put in his bank, in a bank account. He should have a bank account from the moment being born of $1,000 that will earn interest. And he can't touch it until he's 18. So there will be something there. What about unions? What about labor having a voice in how companies should make their decisions? Wasn't it labor unions that got us the health benefits? Would we even have gotten those if we didn't have labor unions? By the way, in Switzerland, most of the businesses are co-ops. The workers of the business have shares in the company. The wage earner here is a wage slave. Only wages to live on, nothing else, no capital, no stock in anything. If you worked and by the way, some people have tried to do something about it. Hewlett-Packard, which was a very fine company, said that the workers should think of buying shares in Hewlett-Packard at a discount rate. But they can't buy and then sell the shares because then you make money. But be a part owner of Hewlett-Packard because you're working there. So in some ways, we have to give more voice to labor, too, in the affairs of companies. In Germany, guess how many directors in a big German company come from the labor union? 40% of the directors are not if they're either union members or the union said these are the kinds of people we want on the board of companies. And then finally, put in occupational training programs for people who lose their job and give them new training and raise the tax rate on the rich. Okay. Now, is American democracy working? You know, I wrote a book on capitalism called Confronting Capitalism, only to support it, but to fix it. I'm not for socialism, I'm for fixing capitalism. Then I wrote a book called Democracy in Decline, worrying about what? Of course, worrying about low voter turnout, worrying about so many things, term limits. Do we need term limits? How come 3 of our possible presidents did not become president because of the Electoral College? They were the ones who got. I'm for the popular vote winning. We would have had Hillary instead of who we have, whatever. Maybe you don't think it's a choice, but that's different. So is democracy working? A lot of things are there. Gerrymandering is a terrible problem. Gerrymandering is the ability of a politician to choose the voters he wants to vote for him. You understand? They design his district with curves and so on, and everyone in it are people who he has wanted. So the result is 90% of the incumbents get reelected. Okay, so we got to fight that. My argument is that capitalism is eating our democracy. Now, what I mean by that is this. Say you want to run for office. Any of you might want to run for office. If you're running for a presidential office, you need a billionaire behind you to get the attention and the money, because campaign finance is so expensive now. So when you got your billionaire, and several of them have gotten their billionaires, and if you win, and an issue comes up that isn't pleasing to the donor that got you into office, you'll be sure to be against that issue. In other words, you'll think first, what does my donor, who I need for the next election, want? I will not cross my donor. The second one I won't cross is my party. And you know, our parties are becoming petrified. Is that the word, petrified? No. What I mean is they demand absolute law. You know, it's so stupid because a party may have some members in the blue states and some in the red states, but the party says everyone votes for what's good for the red states. That puts one of their own people under pressure to say they're for something that they'll lose the election in the blue state. So our parties have too much power. The third thing that might happen is the lobbyists. And I need them. They don't pay me bribes, but they make my life better in many ways. I don't want to go into that problem. Then, if I have any energy left, I think of my district, the people who voted me in. So I'm saying that the amount of money paid by billionaires to choose the candidates and win them over and get them elected is corrupting our democracy. I have some things I could tell you should be done on that. Anyways, GDP, I've already mentioned that. Now, I think, David, you said that it would be democratic socialism. That is not what we're talking about. It's social democracy. It sounds the same, social. So the idea is, when you believe in social democracy, you favor universally accessible public services like education, healthcare. Let me go further. The Scandinavian countries, in most cases, college education is free, not $50,000 a year. And healthcare is free. Even in France, a friend of mine had an illness while in France, had a lot of medical attention, no bill. So you believe in certain things, as I said, you believe in the labor movement, collective bargaining. The Danish citizens get free college tuition, health care for life, 10 months of paid maternity leave, and a guaranteed retirement income. Now, they're paying for it, too. Their taxes are higher. But what do you prefer? Higher taxes and then not having no worries? Or lower taxes, and then if you have a problem, you'll handle it? In fact, let's look at this, and I'm going to be stopping in a few minutes. Socialism is already in the United States, by the way. We just never use that word. National parks, anything provided for the public, by the public. If you want to call it socialism, it's just social democracy in a sense. Fire stations, streets, lighting, water supply, prisons, they're all we have. The question is how big should the government be, and how many things should it produce? Socialism is not communism. Communism is when the state runs all the industry. No one wants that. And it was a terrible failure in Russia and so on. It put them back 30 years behind the other countries. People had projected where they were going, and they didn't get there under communism. Socialism is a mixed system. It is capitalism plus some socialism. It's just a matter of how much do you want the public to make for itself, and how much do you want private industry to make for yourself. And by the way, at best, maybe a socialist would say, I'm only thinking of a few industries that are better managed by government, like the health industry, like Medicare for all. Maybe that industry, with all this fussiness about insurance firms and thousands of this and that, maybe it could be run better by the government. That's something for you to decide as a voter. Okay, let me move to this. This is the next to the last slide, I think. Namely, students have seen this in colleges, and they've been asked to vote. Which economic system do you prefer? The first one is the one we have now. Private enterprise, small government, college at $50,000 a year, health care at $12,000 a year, low taxes, no income redistribution, little welfare. Now, the other system is some public enterprise, somewhat larger government, free college, free health care, high taxes, some redistribution, and general welfare. What do you think the vote is by college students? It's about 70% for the second system. Taxes will be higher. By the way, it wouldn't be most people's taxes. It's going to be, again, the rich are going to have to pay more. Okay. The happiest countries in the world: Finland, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, Switzerland, Netherlands, Canada. By the way, I've been asking Canada to take us over. I want to be a colony. I give each year a leadership award, and I'd like to give an award for the best leader of a country, doing the best for his own country or her own country. And I'm looking at Trudeau. Trudeau is doing a very good job. The U.S. ranked 18 in happiness. We used to rank third, by the way. The decline was due to growing obesity, the opioid crisis, job loss, high cost of health care, high cost of college education. So I'll end with this slide staying on because in my writings, I talk about, let's make a choice of some of these things that would improve the lives of people. I'm guided by what I call the common good. The common good is what's best for the most people. Which policy of two policies, which one would increase more people's happiness than the other? I don't want to even find out whose happiness is being increased. I would rather make policy decisions on maximizing the common good, and so on. So I'll stop here because I'm going to be attacked shortly. And I'll sit down and I'll ask Jeff, who's a very good economist, by the way, from Petersburg College. And please, your turn.
Thank you, Dr. Kotler. You've certainly spent a lot of time pointing out some of the warts of our system in advocating for social democracy. And I'm sure there are other opinions in this room on the subject, and let's hear one of them now. Providing it will be Dr. Jeff Filardo, professor of economics at Petersburg College here in St. Petersburg. Dr. Filardo's research, he says, is primarily in natural resource and environmental economics, but he assures me he also knows something about capitalism. He's here to challenge some of the assertions made about social democracy by Dr. Kotler, and after his opening presentation, they'll engage with one another in moderated discussion, and then we'll go to you for your question. Dr. Filardo.
Thank you so much for the kind welcome. It is an honor to be here. I'd like to thank St. Petersburg College for inviting me, and David, what an amazing opportunity. I'm really thankful. First, I would just like to introduce briefly by saying I'm sort of bewildered to be here arguing against socialism, because my whole life I've just sort of been exposed to the idea that socialism is bad, and when I've studied abroad and lived abroad and worked abroad. I was in Prague when the Czech Republic joined the EU, and there were celebrations at midnight, and they were saying, thank God, we're free. We're finally free. We get to join the EU and move forward. And then I worked in Southeast Asia, and I've been to Laos and Cambodia, and they're just so scared that they may slip back into government provision systems, and they're so happy to be moving more towards this capitalist system. So it's an honor to be here. I only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to fly through these slides, but I'll try to do my best, and then we can expand on them soon. So first of all, my core argument tonight is going to be we essentially have two choices. We have government provision systems, so this is the idea of socialism. They tend to be inefficient, bureaucratic in nature, but very equitable. So we have the public school system, we have dialysis, we have Medicare. We also have private industry and the free markets, which tend to be nimble and efficient, but they allocate resources inequitably. I'm going to argue why things aren't as bad as they seem, what is bad, and some quick fixes to get to them. And then social democracy in the Nordic countries really isn't rosy as it seems. So first, is it really that bad? Comparatively, air quality, water quality is getting better. Voter turnout isn't getting worse, it's been stable. Consumption based on poverty, so consumption-based poverty is actually dropping, and we've made huge gains in the previous decades. And then real measures of consumption in the US are actually comparatively low. Everybody thinks that we're corrupt, but when we actually look at the evidence, it's not the case. So first of all, if we look at this report from the EPA, we can see nitrogen dioxide dropping, sulfur dioxide dropping, carbon monoxide dropping, lead. We're making huge gains according to EPA measurements. If we look at voter turnout for the past 100 years, voter turnout is relatively stable. Poverty rate after transfers, so things like housing subsidies, Medicaid, food stamps, and SNAP, represents that green line there, and the consumption-based poverty level in the US, meaning what people actually consume in terms of goods and services and housing, hit 3% in 2008, much lower than the official poverty rate that's being reported. So one of the measures I would like to say, instead of looking at income inequality, why don't we look at consumption inequality? So how much are the rich consuming versus how much are the poor consuming? Corruption, this one's kind of hard to see, but basically the US has very low bribes that are occurring, and actually we're fairly transparent. We're on par with most of Europe, and we're not really as corrupt as a lot of people perceive the US to be. We're a big country. But what is really bad? Most of these are market failures that any economist worth their salt would address. So here I'm pointing out undersupported positive externalities, college and education, lack of information and competition, medical expenses, our healthcare system, underpunished negative externalities, so bad things that firms do that affect other people, greenhouse gas emissions, and finally barriers to entry, keeping out competition, not letting people enter the market and participate, lobbying and regulation. So this is quick, but what I'm trying to show here is that more education is good. People with higher education levels have lower unemployment and higher wages. But what we see here is that states' local funding levels have dropped significantly lately. So we did do a good job funding these positive externalities, but what we've done is we've transferred those costs to students, and that's why we see student debt levels rising, and that's a big deal. What can we do? We need to get that funding back. Access to colleges must also increase. However, the current incentives in place are creating bad behavior. If you just give blanket loans and scholarships, the incentive there is to increase costs so they can attract more students. So if they get more students, they'll pay for it, debt goes up. I have a couple of plans here I can address later, but let's move on to healthcare. So here, if you look at the healthcare system, it's one of the few goods and services you can buy in this country where you don't know the price before you consume it. That's crazy if you think about it. And if you think of ERs, they're essentially monopolies. You don't have a choice. And in America, every monopoly is regulated. And if it isn't, it should be. This is a quote from Zuckerberg hospital representatives saying, well, basically we have to serve people without financial needs, so we overcharge people who have insurance. Well, the people they overcharge are mostly the middle class people who have insurance who then refuse to pay for it. And so here's a chart of what the Zuckerberg hospital charges versus an average hospital, because they got to make their money somewhere. And people don't have a choice. They're a monopoly. All right, so what can we do? Again, I only have 10 minutes, but I have a couple of policies here. I think it boils down to essentially ERs are a monopoly and they need to be regulated like utilities. So when you pay for your electric bill each month, it's regulated and controlled by the government. They inspect it. I think ERs need something similar. Then we look at drug company spending. So pharmaceuticals being one of the most profit industries, the idea is that they need to be profitable to support R&D, but if we look at this chart, 9 out of 10 pharmaceutical companies spend more on advertising and promoting their products than R&D. That has to change. Government can step in and maybe create some incentives using tax policy to try to change that. Finally, greenhouse gas emissions. It's a negative externality. Firms and individuals need to be held responsible when they harm others. And so we could introduce taxes, cap and trade, but we don't need to make it provisioned by the public authority. Businesses will adjust. There's a lot of examples throughout the history of the US. The Clean Air and Water Act, the National Park System, pollution regulations. As soon as you tell firms what the expectations are, they adjust. They're nimble. Sure, they whine at first, but in the long run, they make money. They still make money, and everybody's happy. Finally, we do see problems that are occurring in our political system. Lobbying is huge. We need to deal with gerrymandering. Super PACs have to be addressed. There needs to be more transparency. But is the answer really a revolution and a change to democratic socialism? It's not super rosy in the Nordic countries, and I'm going to go through some examples. First, this is also data from OECD that we saw from Dr. Kotler, and what we can see is that reported health levels from females in the US are higher than any of these Nordic countries. We see deaths from women per 100,000 from cancer, and the US is the second lowest on the list. All of the Nordic countries have higher mortality from cancer. If we look at average wait times to hospitals, the US has the lowest wait time for elective surgery of any of these systems. A good portion of them you have to wait more than a month, some more than 4 months. If we look at education, we see that we spend right now more money per pupil in the US than every country but Norway. So the money's there, something's happening. If we look at mean years of schooling, the US ranks as the most highly educated country out of all the Nordic countries. And youth unemployment, half of the Nordic countries. So something's going on with the youth in these countries. Finally, income. If we look at the middle class average income level adjusted for differences in prices, the US is roughly 25% more. We hit median income of 60,000, where a lot of these Nordic countries, Norway excluded because they have tons of oil, of about 45,000 per family. Finally, democratic socialism isn't funded by taxes on the rich, it's funded by taxes on the middle class. The highest tax rate in all of these Nordic countries begins at 1.2 times the median income level. What this means is that for the US as an example, anybody making over $60,000 in the US would be taxed at 60%. So the idea that we could tax the rich and live in this system simply isn't true, because in the Nordic systems, where they get this money is from taxes on the middle class. Finally, we look at the future. There's a huge wave of immigration occurring right now in the Nordic countries. If we look at the percent of immigrants that aren't involved in education or employment in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, in Denmark, it's over 40%. 40% of immigrants aren't in school or working. If we compare that to the US, foreign-born immigrants in the US, their unemployment rate is actually lower than native-born people in the US. So they're struggling right now with integration, and what does the future hold as more immigrants arrive or we move forward a few more years? So what I'd like to say is that changes are needed, but a lot of these can be addressed by increasing competition in the private sector, putting the proper incentives in place, curtailing the monopolies, dealing with the externalities. Please get money out of politics. I'm going to agree 100% with that. But I don't think America's ready for a shift to democratic socialism, and I truly don't believe that we would benefit from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Filardo. You've made some good points, and now I would like to get them started talking to each other and to you about some of the points. So I'm going to take a seat here. I think before we start, I need to ask Dr. Kotler to make a clear distinction. Apparently both Jeff and I have confused social democracy and democratic socialism. Aren't they the same?
I think that there's a different implication. When it's social democracy, it is a democracy that cares for the social side of life too, and wants people to not have to struggle to get a good education and be healthy all the time and so on. But when you start calling it democratic socialism, you're calling the system a socialistic system. But it isn't. It's a mixed system. What I call, in fact, let's understand how this happened in Scandinavia. Many years ago, there was a very good journalist named Marcus Childs, and he said, you know, our countries, our Scandinavian countries, we shouldn't go the American way. We shouldn't go the Russian way. We need a middle way. And the middle way would be one that took care of the basics of education and health and so on. And it would be a social democracy rather than just an economic democracy. And so I wouldn't say, in my believing in social democracy, which I do, I would not say I believe in democratic socialism.
Okay.
In the sense, I don't think we need to we can call our system capitalistic with social concern. A socially do you know there's a whole thing called now compassionate capitalism? There's also a whole movement called conscious capitalism. They are all about denting the harms that often take place in a society that doesn't care about what happens to people.
I kind of think I heard Dr. Ferlardo saying something like that. Would the points you're making, would they fit into the terms that he just described?
One of the terms I've heard recently is called cuddly capitalism. Cuddly capitalism.
I like that. I hadn't heard it.
So cuddly capitalism, we really are worried about the general welfare of our residents, and I mean that's something that I wouldn't disagree with. I think many people would agree that the public good is good. We should care about social progress. I think the disagreement is, do we want the government to provision these goods, or do we want the private market to provision those goods? I think helping people and making everybody healthier and increasing well-being is hopefully something everybody can agree with.
And I have to say that, Jeff, I think your statistics and points were well taken, which shows that it's not a simple matter to fall in one camp or another, because many of the things you said are important. We have to be very careful as we change anything very basic in the system. There are risks. Just take the health system. They call it socialized medicine if they don't want the kind that I would prefer. Watch the way words are used. The Republicans will say, the Democrats believe in death panels. Now, they will come up with a term that, of course, no one wants a death panel. Does that mean some American at the extreme said, if someone is over 92 years old, why save his life when he's almost dead, or something like that? I don't know. So there's rhetoric, and the whole field gets confused with rhetoric, which is marketing. And by the way, I'm responsible for some bad marketing too.
Well, I would like to pursue that rhetoric and a couple of points.
And he's a journalist, by the way. Everyone appreciates that. David won a Pulitzer Prize on journalism, and we need good journalists like you, Dave.
That was a long time ago, 50 years ago. But okay, I heard you say that 70% of people have been polled favor higher taxes, and especially taxes on the rich.
Can we try that out with a vote here?
I'm sorry?
Can we ask them to vote? They remember seeing
sure.
an economic system, number one, and an economic system, two. What would your children, or what would you have wanted to live under, one or two?
System one.
Which is our present system.
Which is what we have. System two.
Wow.
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 Wow. Okay, then, here's my follow. Why was Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, so vilified and so attacked that the Republicans succeeded in gutting it, when that is one of the things we just said we like?
What was being attacked is the forcing of young people to buy some insurance or be fined. And it was essential to support the money needed for the program. So they attacked it at a point that this interferes with freedom of choice. But, you know, all of us have to have an automobile tax. I mean, we have to buy a license. We have to, there's several parts of our daily life where we have to do something for the common good.
But under this, we would all be taxed more.
Yeah.
So we've all just said that's okay.
Yeah. You know, to get away from the headache of how do I pay my bills? What happens to me if I get, my savings are blown from an injury or something? I mean, some people might prefer a more protective kind of existence.
Okay.
It's a safety net problem.
Here's something that I found in your writing. just to go to a national healthcare system like Canada's, for example. You've written that their single-payer system, they have a wait time of 1 month to see a specialist. For diagnostic services like MRI, 2 weeks, or CAT scan. For surgery, 4 weeks. Do you think the Americans would be happy with such a system, even if it was a good quality of care?
Well, I have the same statistics, and I worry about it. I don't know why Canada cannot have more doctors and not have these delays, and that's why a lot of Canadians come across the border for our services. And if you're going to say that if we move to their system, we'll also have the delays, it depends. I would just cut our military budget. Then we'd have no problem.
Dr. Filardo, what about the lack of support for Obamacare, but the support we just saw for universal health care?
Okay, I think if you look at the millennial population and a lot of the youth, they feel that a lot of them have gotten the raw end of the deal. So they're dealing with things like climate change, stagnant wages, high student loan debt. So you keep dumping more and more onto this generation. Well, as we look at people who have been in society for a while, they tend to have more income. And then you say, oh, by the way, you now have to contribute to the public good, which is this new healthcare system. So in addition to Social Security, Medicare, a destroyed environment, stagnant wages, we now want you to pay more for our healthcare. That was kind of a tough sell, and I think that's why it didn't go over well. There's a lot of animosity among the youth in America that feel that they've gotten the short end of the stick, and so to ask them to pay more has made them frustrated.
What if they got free college tuition with that?
I think that a lot of college students would support that idea, especially those that have high student loan debt. And then as soon as they graduated and saw the tax bill, as soon as they made over $60,000, a tax rate of 60%, I think they would start to consider otherwise.
Let's change course here a little bit. Elizabeth Warren, whom you referred to, has said she and Representative Ben Ray Lujan will propose a bill, if they haven't already, to require corporate boards to take into account the interests of customers, employees, and community in addition to shareholders. It would require 40% of their board seats to be from employees or consumers. And that's a system in Germany. Would such a system work here? Would our industry put up with it, both of you? And what would the shareholders say about that?
Okay, it's beginning to happen anyways. Many companies, all companies, work for the shareholders. They weren't, in fact, if you're only going to work for the shareholders, which they have been, you better pay the least you have to pay to workers, pay the least to suppliers, pay the least to distributors, because that leaves you the most money, which is a myth. It actually doesn't work that way when you put that into practice. So the new theory is stakeholders, not shareholders. Let the company do well for the team that made them successful. Every successful company is because of a team of employees who cared, suppliers who stuck with that company, distributors who want to sell the products. And as these companies begin to think of shareholders rather than stakeholders, stakeholders instead of shareholders, they're doing the right thing.
Well, when I was a young man and going in my career, that was the practice of corporations. What happened? Largely it was the practice.
That your experience was that the boss was trying to make everyone happy in the team.
Right, right. And they took care of their retirees. That's why we had all these generous retirement plans.
Mm-hmm. What happened? I don't know. You know, we've had a tendency toward monopolization, and, you know, there would be branch plants in different small towns, and then, they're going to buy up this company and that company and consolidate. You know, the urge to monopolize, to what's happening with hospitals now. One of the reasons for the high cost of hospitals is they're not only buying up other hospitals, but they're buying up all the physicians. So the physicians are not independent either.
Right.
And they've got you without telling you what you're paying for anything. $10 for a box of Kleenex while you're in the hospital. You don't pay it, you don't know you paid it, but it's right in the record there.
I would just like to add briefly that I think consolidation and monopolies are probably one of the biggest issues we're facing, and there's a lot of rhetoric out there trying to confront firms like Facebook, Amazon, and Google, and then you hear this counter argument that, well, they need to be large to remain competitive internationally. And personally, I find that scary. We have a history of breaking up trusts and large monopolies that are taking
Teddy
advantage
Roosevelt,
of the
where
consumer.
are you?
We need Teddy Roosevelt, we need trust busting, we need a political backbone, and I would agree with you that the consolidation and monopolies where consumers don't have a choice, that's one of the, I think, the largest things we need to address.
Why do they cut the budget for watching the competition level? Why do they cut the budget for the IRS, namely people who will check on who's really paying what they owe? I mean, it's ridiculous. That, by the way, held up a lot of, with the when we shut the government, the IRS was shut practically down, and they couldn't do the work. It's going to be a mess again. But I want to go back to one thing that I just slipped in. We are spending too much on defense. We are building a defense system that is based on World War I and II, and not what the next war will be. Let's hope there won't be another war. It's going to be so different. Do you know the Navy refuses the money to build battleships, we have more capacity than we ever need of almost everything: airplanes, battleships, submarines, nuclear bombs. How do we get? What happens is it's a corruption. The corruption is this: that we managed to build in every state a munitions factory. That is a defense property, and your representative or your senator has to keep the jobs going. So we need these people to keep making bombs and other things, even if we're not going to. And that won't be the next war. The next war is going to be such a different kind of phenomena that will not be benefited by battleships and a bunch of other things. And take that money and build up our education. Make college more affordable, and so on.
I'd like to go back to, before we go to the audience, back to what seems to be a growing acceptance of what we're talking about tonight. Last week, or couple weeks ago, January 9th, no less than Tucker Carlson, many of you know who that is, on Fox News, who is not known for being a liberal. He delivered a startling attack on free market capitalism. He referred to America's ruling class, quote, as mercenaries behind the failure of the middle class, and especially the white middle class. And he pointed to all the inequities in wages and job opportunities as the source of the declining marriage rate, the opioid crisis, disintegration of families, all the complaints of middle rural America, and in fact the abandonment. And these are the kinds of things that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and AOC have been saying, Anastasia Ocasio-Cortez have been saying. So what do you say about this?
Well, I think he's a brave man, and he'll be looking for a job shortly, unfortunately. It's wonderful that he was willing to do that and say that.
Dr. Filardo, did you hear about that or not?
Yeah, I looked into it, and I agree. I would say, while I really enjoy the free market and the freedom to decide where to spend your money and participate in a system, freedom of speech and being able to share ideas and communicate without fear of reprisal or being abducted or jailed is probably the best thing in America. So I may not agree with all of what he said, but I'm really glad he said it.
Amen. All right, now we'll start to take some questions for you, and please wait for a microphone. Jacqueline and Sharon, where are you, Sharon? we'll bring one to you. Please make it a short question, not your opinion about what's going on in the country, please.
Hi, thank you. Vinny Tafiro, first of all, thank you for mentioning conscious capitalism. I'm the founder of the Florida chapter, and we're trying to make changes. So, my question goes to healthcare. And right now, at the beginning of last year, there was an experiment announced by Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and Chase to try a nonprofit healthcare model. Counting all of their employees and probably the benefits for partners, you're looking at a sample size of around 3 million people. What does that do if that's successful, and what can the economic community do to help them be successful? So rather than just exploitative medical or socialized medical, what about nonprofit medical?
I wish I knew more about that. Do you know about that?
So there's a big push in a lot of industries of various sizes. Obviously, if you have larger industries, they can spread the risk a little bit more evenly, but it's called internalizing risk. So essentially what these firms will do is they'll offer health care to their employees. They take in premiums, and then they buy what's called stopgap coverage in case somebody gets really, really sick and they end up running out of money. But because healthcare costs are rising so fast right now, there's a huge push for that to occur among big firms and small firms. And really, at the end of the day, any profits that are made by the firm insuring itself would then go back to the firm, or under a best case scenario, its employees.
Thank you, Judge. That was a good explanation and a good question. Over here, Sharon. Wait for the mic.
Mandatory here.
Yes, we should take a vote on that. Australia fines you if you don't vote. You're fined. Should we? How many would be in favor of fining the people who don't vote? Thank you.
Wow, we are becoming a pretty darn liberal audience. Question?
This is for Dr. Filardo. You mentioned that money in politics, that's a big problem for us, and that should be addressed. Who exactly do you think is going to address this? It's the people with the money that are making these decisions. So who is going to address our major problems that we have? Every one of those problems that we've been talking about are because of greed and power.
No, I agree. In conversations I have with my colleagues, I think back to socialism would be great. A dictator should be great. We just need a benevolent dictator or a benevolent social system or society. And so really, if you have good leaders in place, the system that you ultimately are left with is going to be better. And so unfortunately, we do have all of these problems, and the money in politics is an issue. We have to hope that at some point we can elect representatives who will stand up for the people and institute those regulations and control that get us back to an economy that works better in terms of efficiency and internalizing those externalities.
He's saying we don't have an answer. It's a very tough problem. The very people who should be who are needed to make the change aren't going to make it.
On my left, Sharon.
Bernie Sanders recently pointed out that simply increasing the Social Security tax from its current ceiling at $118,000 a year income to cover all income would be enough money to provide universal health care to everyone in the United States. How do you feel about that?
Perfect. I think he's right. I think a lot of the things he has suggested, forget that he calls himself a socialist or whatever else, he's the best person to have taken every one of our problems and pointed out what could be solutions to those problems. I like that kind of mentality that identifies problems and says, there's 7 solutions that have been suggested, here's the best one in my mind. So in regard to that one, I think, I forgot exactly what you said, but Bernie, we should pay attention. He should not run for president, but he should be listened to.
Okay, it's always been personally confounding to me that people quit paying Social Security taxes after they earn, what is it, over $110,000. Social Security taxes drop to zero. That has been confusing to me, and so I think that it should be explored, continuing or expanding that branch. But I do want to point out that there is a large portion of the population of the U.S. that does receive medical health care. As I was looking through some of the information, I don't know if you were aware, but half of the births that occur in the U.S. occur via Medicaid. So women are covered under Medicaid or our socialized medical system. So a lot of these systems may be larger than we're giving them credit for or are aware of.
I'd like to point out to that point, the very first program this institute did in this room in fall of 2011 was on the national debt, and the speaker pointed out that a few tweaks, like you just said, would bring up the Medicare and Social Security system into the black for decades ahead. Not major, not a burden on anybody, but our leaders don't do it. And that video is available on our website. A question over here.
Hi, thank you very much for your comments. First of all, about the money in politics thing, a year ago, St. Petersburg passed an ordinance which put a damper on money in politics. And that ordinance is being considered and emulated in places around the country. So that's a very helpful sign. My question, you both talked about the OECD standings in the United States. I'd like to know what they were like 10, 20 years before, and what caused the dramatic drop in our world leadership standing.
That's a good question. I listed some things that hurt our leadership, but even I hate to get into anything that's political, but we have not been building, we've been destroying what we built up as alliances. But that's not your question, so I better stop right here. Your question has to do, I don't have the old OECD data. I think we were standing much higher in the past in that area than and so you were asking what put us behind. And I think we've listed a lot of these things that, why did we fall behind in education, on science, on English and all that? So I can't answer that question, but it's a good question.
Dr. Filardo, you're an academic. Give us a...
I don't have information on the old OECD data, and I don't have much insight as to the cause of the recent declines. I have been traveling around the world in the previous 2 decades, and I would say probably the war with Iraq and then the inner turmoil has really lowered our standing, just conversing with others from around the world about how they feel about the U.S.
Well, just from my own perspective, haven't we as a people grown more apathetic and less engaged in our government than we used to be, and as a result, everything has fallen down. So we have met the problem, and it is us. Over here, a question, Sharon, fine, you got a question over there?
A comment, your slides here pointed out how there's 40 years for retirement for all of us, theoretically. My question is, or a comment I should say, shouldn't we as seniors, instead of forking off to our grandchildren X amount of dollars and say, here, take it, shouldn't we become involved in these years with our grandchildren and after their education, which incidentally we might have paid for, maybe help them start a small business? Seems to me like we need to, as a family, it would help grow families. And I also think that it would just be an impetus, because small businesses, my wife and I own a small business. It's where this is at in terms of our economic growth as far as I'm concerned.
Well, whichever way it can be done, we should believe in small and medium-sized businesses. And the trouble is, when they're successful, they're bought up by the big businesses. Well, yes, I know. No one's going to buy 5 million small businesses, but the point is, we see what I would like to do for some families is the easiest way for someone to get started if they want to run a business is to get a franchise from McDonald's or one of the other. Yeah, are you a franchisor? No. Yeah, you should.
Franchisee. Well,
if you're running a good business, you should let others pay you to buy the branch.
Yes, we started in our old age, and that's what we're doing.
Good for you. Good for you.
Okay. Jacqueline, have a question?
It's not exactly a question. I work with a group called Represent.us, and we are working, and it's nonpartisan. We have Republicans, Independents, Democrats, and we've been working with these issues for about 5 or 6 years, trying to find some solutions. And I think the lady that talked about the St. Petersburg Ordinance, that was probably part of our group. We are also looking at ranked choice voting. We need to change how we elect our leaders, because our leaders are like 2 football teams, and they're making it work for them, but not us.
Yes, you want to explain how it works? When in the voting system, which is now used in maybe Vermont or somewhere else I read, you put down your first choice, second choice, third choice, and so on, right? And then they eliminate those who had low choice, and it's a different voting system. It should be looked at, and I think we should use it.
Yeah, the advantage of it is you don't have to be rich to get on the ballot. I'm from Illinois. We were told that to get anybody even to run for state representative, they had to have $50,000 of their own money. I'm not talking about going to Washington. I'm talking about going to Springfield. Yes. That lets a lot of people out. Yeah. With the ranked choice voting, anybody can get their name on the ballot, and then the people vote, and if nobody gets 51%, if somebody gets 51%,
it's over.
That's the character. But if not, then they take the votes from the others and split them evenly.
They redistribute what was
to the
left.
top
Yes.
3. So
good system. Good system.
I'll come
back. Sharon.
My question is, Dr. Farrar, excuse me. Dr. Farrar, a question to you, and it's dealing with the wealth tax. And I wasn't clear where you were coming from in regards to possible wealth tax. And before I ask the question as to what you favor, if anything, on wealth tax, let me give you some statistics. Coming out of the Industrial Revolution, late 19th, early 20th century, 1% of Americans owned 40% of the wealth of this nation. And I think you know that statistic. If you look at the wealth statistic today in the United States, it's almost the same thing. 1% of America owns 40% of the wealth of the United States. That's an undisputed figure. We have had high tax rates during certain administrations. You go back to Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt in 1937 had a 79% tax rate on incomes of $50,000 or more, which is equivalent today of a $800,000 annual income. Dwight David Eisenhower had a 91% tax rate on high income. So my question goes back to this whole concept of a wealth tax. Those individuals that are making great wealth in the United States, let's give them their due. They're entrepreneurs, they're industrialists. But they're not doing it alone. They're doing it in the United States of America, where there are certain factors that allow them to do that. I'm going back to the question, why not? And it may not be Elizabeth Warren's, it may not be Bernie Sanders, but there's something wrong in the United States when 1% own 40% of the nation's wealth. Why not a wealth tax?
You answer. You were asked the question, but I had been in favor of it. But go ahead.
Okay. Personally, I'm against it. If you look at the wealth tax and the implications that it allows, it basically says that if you accumulate wealth, it's going to be taken away from you. And if you look at immigrants into America in terms of net millionaires and rich people, people come to America and invest because they feel secure with their assets here. And so I worry about an outflow of capital and a reduction of an inflow of capital. But okay, so that being said, I think that's what will happen. Is that necessarily bad? No, because wealth inequality will go down if all the rich people leave. What I would also like to caution against is that they have very high tax rates in New Jersey, very high income tax rates. And one billionaire decided to move to the great state of Florida. He's not paying taxes in New Jersey anymore. They had to hold an emergency meeting of the state Congress to figure out what to do because the tax revenues from one individual changed their whole budget that year. So what I caution people against is if you want to tax the rich, fine. If that makes you feel good, fine, tax them. But don't become dependent on the revenue from those taxes. Because then what happens if they leave or choose not to pay?
Excuse me. Sorry. I'd like to add a point here which refers to what you said, Dr. Kotler, about the Elizabeth Warren and her proposal, which you apparently got out of the same Paul Krugman column I read yesterday. He referred to the 1% tax on income of people over 50 million, and 2%, and then an additional 1% on people with in excess of 100 million. He quotes two other economists who calculated that out. In 10 years, that would affect 75,000 people, only households, only 75,000. It would generate $2.75 trillion in 10 years. By my rough math, that would basically erase our annual deficit of around $1 trillion if we did that.
Well, go ahead now. What do you think of that?
Oh, and all of those numbers are rosy and they sound great, but you're basically you're taking wealth out of the people who are using it to buy capital to produce things, and that's why a lot of the reason why we have high productivity in the US. And so I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying what happens when that wealth leaves that area? Are there implications in productivity? And if the answer is no, then go ahead and do it. But we should at least explore what the possible implications are of doing that.
Let me read the closing line of Mr. Krugman's column on this, who used to be my favorite economist. Now I have two different new ones. But he said, if we did that tax, how much would entrepreneurs be deterred by the prospect if their big ideas pan out that they'd have to pay additional taxes on their second 50 million? He said, not likely. He said Denmark and Sweden did try that in the past, and it did not work against them, that it worked for their economy. So, a question, who's next on the question? Here's one here, Sharon.
Just one quick comment. I did hear some good news today, something I was not aware of, but 11 states in the United States so far have adopted a platform where their electoral college delegates had to wait until the national vote was in, and they had to vote for the person that had the highest national vote. They can do this without changing the Constitution, and it's 100% legal. So when it comes to Florida, say yes to this.
Okay. Over here.
Yes, I heard a question this evening, and the question was, why is there a long wait in Canada for medical service? Well, I asked the same question when I was in Canada, and I got the same answer. It's because we have a shortage of doctors. And I said, well, why is that? It's because they are moving to the States for higher wages.
Ah, okay. All right, back to you, Sharon.
Or Florida.
Oh, I'm sorry, do you want to respond?
No, I can say they're not only moving to the United States, they're trying to move to Florida.
they want to move to Florida, okay. I'm sorry to cut you off.
I would like our two debaters to contrast themselves based on what I'm going to say. It seems to me there, with significant polarization, both on the left and the right in our current system, that what used to be middle of the road is now liberal. What used to be liberal is now socialist. What used to be conservative is now middle of the road, and the poles are pulling it farther apart. When I listen to both of you two, especially on the slides, and what you said needed to be done, I thought you both were left of center. How would you contrast each other? How would you talk with each other about that?
All right, in my own case, I am left of center. And what are you, by the way, Jeff?
I'd probably say something similar. Okay, fine.
It's hard to be
right.
centrist, because when you're centrist, you don't get any change in the system. It's going to be the same system. You got to be a little on the left. Now, the Republicans have a division that's occurring, which is very interesting. There are Republicans who are socially liberal and financially conservative, and there's also those Republicans who are socially conservative and financially liberal. And I didn't know about that second distinction. And so they themselves are a little confused about, in other words, the party was normally, you're conservative socially and conservative financially. And that's why we hear talk about third parties, because the two-party systems don't allow a lot of expression. But I worry about Howard Schultz. In fact, may I suggest that all of you stop going to Starbucks? Express your vote now so he doesn't actually do what he said. I want the receipts to go down, and then then his board says, come on, Howard, don't run, or run as a Democrat. But he will make the Republicans win because he'll rob the Democrats of the votes.
May I add this caveat that the opinion you just heard expressed is not that of St. Petersburg College. Dr. Filardo, you want to answer that question?
Could you just repeat it real quick?
You said you're similar to him, but do you want to expand on?
Yeah, okay, so for the purpose of the debate tonight, I wanted to take the point of view of why we don't need to make dramatic shifts, but I am an environmental economist. My job is basically measuring the trees and the amount of carbon that is output in this in the global sector, and I try to come up with policies that manage how to internalize these externalities. But I would argue that when it comes to policies, I probably do lean a bit more on the side of the market-based solutions, so things like cap and trade or letting free markets operate, but they do definitely need to have oversight.
But I want to add something. You made a statement during your talk that if we go to government to do anything, it's going to be less efficient than if we do it with private enterprise. I think that's very debatable. We should examine. As a matter of fact, I would really think that if we put most of our medicine under government and get rid of all these people who are making middlemen profits all the way through from insurance companies to whatever, we'd have a less cost and as good a system. Now, I may be wrong, but don't ever say that government can't do something good, Because that falls into the trap of their own rhetoric that they are always talking about.
Okay, I just want to clarify. I didn't say they don't do things good. I said that everything else equal, they tend to be less efficient than when the private market engages it, but they are much more equitable. So do we want an equitable police force or an efficient police force? I'm going to vote for equity. So there are definitely certain sectors of the economy that the government should provision, but I guess my core argument is going to be we should at least be aware of the opportunity cost of the increased bureaucratic nature if we do decide to
All
make those
companies
changes.
are bureaucratic. My God. Did you ever work for a large company? You can't get anything done. Where's the efficiency that you're talking about? That's just a matter of size, whether it's government size or if it's private enterprise size.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
And I don't think you can say there's a trade-off between efficiency and equity. I think sometimes the solution of the government doing something will produce both equity and efficiency. Not always. It's what bothers me. Look, I'm in the 1% class. I want to give away more money. I want to be taxed more. I have no problem being taxed more. I feel I should be taxed more because I don't want to build a mansion. I don't want to have a private plane. I think we're building too many mansions and too many private planes. You didn't hear about it. It's in the news. There's a fellow who spoke at Davos today. Oh, yeah. And Davos is the meeting of the top business people in the world and top government officials. And he was on a panel, and he said, I think it's kind of strange that we're on a panel talking about climate and improving climate, and 1,500 private planes brought you in here. 1,500 private planes brought you in here. Do you know what that did to the climate? And he stunned them. He stunned them. He says, can we talk about taxing you more? And here's the thing he made. He said, a lot of us feel good about rich people because they are philanthropists. And God bless them. That's wonderful to be that's why I talked about the giving pledge. You should be a philanthropist. But the real answer, he is saying, is we got to tax the rich more. Because philanthropy is fine, but basically, these people are earning just too much money. And it's offensive, really. That's his position.
And if I may add, he said, why are you fighting taxing yourself so much? He said, I feel like I'm at a fireman's convention and we're not talking about using water to fight fires. Whose side are we on? Sharon, over here. This one.
David, you'll get this.
I know. Oh, that's just Brad. I know him. We'll get Brad.
Well, let's make sure we get his question. But you said, what happened? You talked about how things were, and then there was a decline. I think it was probably in the 80s or so. But Hedrick Smith was here. You're probably familiar with his book, Who Stole the American Dream? And he was very clear that it was your professor that started the decline, Milton Friedman, with a memo that he sent to the chair of the Chamber of Commerce saying, hey, we're giving too much money away, let's hold it back here for the stockholders, rather than the stakeholders who had been involved before. But then there was a corporation that said, we're going to raise the salaries of the people working for this corporation until they get to at least $60,000 a year. And the people in the major investing organizations told their professionals, when people come to you to invest their portfolio, don't invest in that company because they're giving all their money away to the people working for them. I read that. Do you have a comment on that?
He was, if it's the same story, he has his own business. He created something really new, and he wanted everyone to be paid at $60,000. And they were happy people. And that was a bad example to set for the others who don't want to pay anyone more than they have to. I saw that.
Well, I can add to what this gentleman said about Hedrick Smith. he wrote this book just before the 15 campaigns, Who Stole the American Dream? And it lays out chapter and verse of starting in the 60s with now Supreme Court Justice Powell, before he got to be a justice, rallied the Republicans to lobby, and they built and give more political funds. They built up of such a force in Washington that they soon changed so many policies, and that changed corporate behavior. And I want to recall that Jack Westinghouse was one of the first who broke the mold about corporate responsibility and made Westinghouse one of the cost cutters in that profits above employees. Anyway, enough of my lobbying. Brett has a question over here.
Hi, my name's Brett Shortridge. I'm an alumnus. I'm not a student at this college. I graduated. I don't think we have two teams playing a game. I think we have one team playing a scrimmage. So I don't really think there's much difference in our parties. And it's not democratic socialism, but I believe that we have a form of socialism in this country already. It's called corporate socialism. The defense budget is $700 billion.
Thank you.
We make stuff we don't need. We make stuff that Ray Ordiano, the head of the military, doesn't want. It's good and it's in somebody's district to build it. $700 billion. It just increased. $120 billion. The interest on our debt is 8% of our budget this year. So we have socialism for corporations. So we should maybe, whatever label you want to give it, why don't we give it back to some of the people? It is we, the people. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad.
And how about one more vote? Raise your hands if you want us to build a wall. One person, two people. Oh, you. All right, who says we don't need a wall, we need just control over the border? Thank you. And he won't listen to you either. He doesn't listen to anyone.
Okay. No, we got to watch politics here.
Why?
Jack, Sharon over here. You come so we can see you.
Hello, my name is Serge, and I got a question here. So
We can't see you.
Oh, I'm right here in the corner. So you guys talking about changing a very, very complex economic system. And it turns out that in system science, there's this thing called unintended consequences. And I think that Dr. Falardo kind of talked about that a little bit. So with this thing with corporate social responsibility, and I'm going to ask this for Dr. Falardo just simply because he went to Cal State Chico. PG&E just recently claimed bankruptcy. So I just want to hear if you have a few words, choice words on that subject.
I mean, the travesty that happened in Paradise is just, I mean, I went to a Super Bowl party there in 2011, and the town is gone now. So the effects of climate change, the extreme weather events, the fire, PG&E, unfortunately, I'm not aware of what's going on right there, but I do remember paying my utility bills to them. But obviously there was some sort of corporate malpractice that went on there. They are a regulated entity. They were guaranteed a product. They actually paid their employees well. I knew several people who were receiving pensions from them. But unfortunately, I'm not aware of their current practice, other than the bonus they paid to their departing CEO, of what could cause them to go bankrupt. That seems to be malpractice and should be investigated.
Okay. Jacqueline over here.
First of all, I'd like to comment about the thing about the tax rate in Eisenhower. We have to remember that the tax rate there was still with the background of World War II, that people were knowing we had to pay for some of these things. So that it isn't really the same sort of thing that we have to think about in terms of tax rates at that point, because people were willing to pay for that for the war effort. Another thought is that we do need public-private cooperation in basic investment. The big generators in our economy in America, from the beginnings of the Erie Canal, railroads, telegraph, and up to and including the technology revolution in the internet and what have you, has been a public-private cooperation in basic investment, accompanied by relatively open immigration. And the greatest generator of new businesses are immigrants. From the co-founder of Google to my husband's humble car repair business. These are the people that are making jobs for America and doing it. So we need, as I said, a public-private investment in our economy.
Very good. Agreed, very much.
Any other comments there? Oh, one last question. This is going to have to be the last, I think. Sharon over there.
Why don't you let the last four people just put their question out, and then we'll comment. Then we'll collect the last four questions.
I just have a quick comment that I would like to make about you mentioned something about the emergency rooms, about the monopoly. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm in the healthcare business. And unbeknownst to most of you, when somebody comes in our emergency room and say that they fall down 2 or 3 steps and they fracture their hip, when as soon as they come in the emergency room, they get tagged with this trauma code. It's a $25,000 code. They come in, they don't know that they got it, and then when they come in, they're in for 1 day, and then they call me and they say, well, we've signed off. Go ahead and take over. They didn't need to be on the case in the first place. This happens time and time again. We get this trauma code, $25,000. Even tried to go to the legislature. Some people, active groups, tried to get it reversed, but the big corporations wouldn't allow it. But it's amazing. You know, just so I totally agree with that comment, and I'm glad you mentioned it.
Thank you. Any comment?
No comment. I just want to hear some more questions so I can think about those things.
Okay, we'll take one more. I know some people are wanting to get out, so.
Thank you. Bloomberg said that we have plenty of money, it's just being spent wrong. And how do we clean up the waste in the government? Because I don't think that you would have to do away with anything if you could clean up the waste.
There's a lot of waste. We used to have
gross.
Senator Kefauver watching that. We can't find a senator who's going to pay enough attention to make it his specialness out of catching all that waste. So I think you're onto something, and we just need maybe civilians to put some time into spotting these things and publicizing them when they're found.
Well, you want to make a one-payer healthcare system, but the VA hospitals, they're wonderful places, but the waste is so astronomical. And I worked there for 36 years. So I can say that the waste in government is, people would just, and then the pork barrels. You know, how do you do away with this to improve our government?
Well, let's think about that, but I don't think we can get into answers right now. It's true that we have to figure that out. So thank you so much for your interest, and I come from Sarasota, so we're part of the wonderful coast we are on. I'm a West Coast Florida guy, not a East Coast Florida guy. And I think there's a lot of Midwesterners here, too. Is that right? The nice side of things. So I hope to be back sometime. Thanks very much for coming.
Doctor, any final remarks?
I just want to
hold on.
I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here. This was a great experience. I hope you all enjoyed it. It was a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Kotler. Thank you again, St. Petersburg College, and David for inviting me.
And thank you both of you for taking the time to do this. And I want to ask you if you would give a round of applause for the staff who helped make this possible. Jacqueline, Sharon, Jonathan, and all the student volunteers. I want to call your attention to a couple of our next programs before you leave. March 21st, we're having a program, March 21st, The Changing Face of Jim Crow. This is a documentary about a almost lynching in Georgia, and it's going to be pretty provocative. On March 26th, our next dinner program, we're going to address the Me Too movement, only we're going to add the men to it and talk about due process for men. And we also have on the 22nd of February, the Caregivers Conference. If you know someone or if you are caring for someone with dementia, please consider coming to this to learn how you can help yourself and your loved one better. That's it. Thank you, everyone, and good night. Safe journey home.